Dr. Grace Franck came to visit us from Boston. So she is an associate professor of medicine at Harvard and is a hospitalist at Beth Israel Deaconess. She is the editor-in-chief of MedEdPORTAL. Thank you. She's the editor-in-chief of MedEdPORTAL and also serves on the editorial board of 2 different publications. She has several leadership roles in faculty development, including Vice Chair of Mentoring in the Department of Medicine and also the Director of the Rabkin Fellowship of Medical Education. So thank you so much, Dr. Huang, for being here, and we look forward to your talk.
Can y'all hear me okay? All right, good. Good nodding. Excellent. All those people over there nodding a lot, I'm going to need that active interactivity later. So thank you so much for sticking with me. And those of you who've actually been here for all 3 sessions will have gotten everything I have to say about medical education. The 3 areas of passion that I have, one is about writing and the scholarship of writing. The second is career development, and the third is faculty development. So I have purged all that I have to share with you by the end of this session. So I have no relevant disclosures. And, all right, oh, whoa, moving fast. All right, quiz number 1. We're gonna start with some interactivity. Who has seen the musical Hamilton? Okay. Has it been not in this area yet? Okay. It's about to come out? No. It will. It is very hard to get tickets. As soon as you hear about it, you should. What is Hamilton the musical fundamentally about? Which is probably hard to say if you haven't seen it, but maybe many of you have access to the soundtrack. Ooh, going the wrong direction. It's actually about writing. And here's one of many, many quotes in the musical Hamilton about writing. And I won't read the whole thing, but I wrote myself out of hell when my prayers to God were met with indifference. I picked up a pen, I wrote my own deliverance. There are themes and phrases in many of the songs in the soundtrack that are about Hamilton writing and what he did with the power of writing. There's, for instance, one quote that is around, he wrote like there was no tomorrow. And that would be what I think is really the theme for today. Now, the second exercise that I have is one that is actually kinesthetic in nature. What I'd love you to do is stand up. So stand up. Great. We're going to have a physical warm-up here. I want you to shake your top body and your faces, stretch out your faces, because I'm going to ask for you to have, we did a little bit of a free association game yesterday where we were brainstorming about catchy titles that might get your work published. And now I want you to do the facial and physical expression of the words that I'm going to show you on the screen. So the first word, just give me your first immediate reaction with your facial expression, with your hands and gesturing to the following word. Admitterships. Okay, all right. I got to see a little bit more. I'm seeing no hand movements here, no rude gestures. Post-procedural admissions. Oh, okay, here are some of these things, all right? Wow. Transitions of care. Oh, yay, you can see Muhammad there, does that. And then writing, that's the one I want, writing. Some expressions for writing. I see kind of a lot of ambivalence, more, okay, shrugging and so forth. Good, okay, did you capture that? We're trying to put it on Twitter, so let's give it one more shot at a very visible facial expression or gesture for your reaction to the word writing. Okay, thumbs down. Let's see, do we have anything here? Okay, all right. Thank you so much for humoring me. You may sit down. So, all right. In a lot of audiences where I do a similar type of needs assessment, most people hate this process. And there are a lot of different reasons. I would say too, when as soon as writing enters the conversation, I suddenly feel guilt and all of those unpleasant thoughts. And so my objectives today, the first one is I want to call out those behaviors and barriers that make it so hard for us to think about publishing and about writing. There are system-wide problems and there are individual ones that you're all struggling with, me included. The second thing is to sort of think about action orientation. What are the strategies that can make the process of publishing and writing much more satisfying than it currently is? And lastly, a commitment to yourself and possibly to your institution about making writing a more important part of your career. So I want to tell you first a story about my first publication. It was about residents being uncomfortable with doing inpatient procedures. When I started writing this work, and it was about 2006, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so duh. Of course residents are not comfortable doing inpatient procedures. But we thought that we would actually, measure this and look at the impact of supervision on their comfort. What I learned through this first process was, one, that even though ideas that I thought were kind of duh had some value as a contribution to the literature, because believe it or not, no one had really written about how uncomfortable residents were doing procedures. It was just part of the culture that we would just do them. And secondly, what I learned, and possibly more important than anything else, was the value of a mentor. This was the research mentor who essentially gave me the formula to writing a manuscript, some of which I taught yesterday. He told me what makes a 5-paragraph discussion, and essentially in doing so gave me the keys to scholarship. I think back on that mentor and that experience, and it makes me think, wow, he was really the one that opened the door for me. The second thing he did was when I got that first revise and resubmit from the American Journal of Medicine, I was demoralized. It was so negative. Since then, I've come to realize that peer review is really about critique. It's not about affirmation. But he said that behind that revise and resubmit is an invitation to be published. And so he helped frame the crying into a positive spin. Now, I've only a couple minutes into my talk, and I've already told you a lie. That was not actually my first publication. My first actual publication, I'm kind of embarrassed to share about. So I decided as an enterprising medical student that one way to get my work published was to enter a literary contest of all things. So the Journal of General Internal Medicine was having, for trainees, a literary contest where you could submit a narrative. I have a sister who has lupus and has suffered deeply with that disease. She's been the subject of my personal statements from college to medical school to residency. And so I thought I'd write about what it meant to be the sister and a caregiver to my sister. It was really hard to put on paper. It was very heart-wrenching. I thought it was poignant. I thought it expressed what was most powerful in my experience as becoming a physician through that, and I submitted it. Now, also being an enterprising medical student, there was a poem as part of that essay. I hate poetry. I was an English major, but absolutely hate poetry. I threw together something in 15 minutes and submitted the two because maybe one of those two would get accepted. What was accepted was my poem. So they rejected the narrative about my sister, someone who has influenced me so strongly and continues to do so. And what I learned about that experience was twofold. One is a rejection of something that was so personally compelling to me was not a rejection of my professional and or personal identity. But secondly, and I'm not letting you read this poem, that there's a reason why it's such small fin. I'm not giving you the citation either because it's a terrible poem, but was around the idea of stepping out of your comfort zone. I will never be known in scholarship as a poet, but it is the idea of like getting out of your comfort zone. So I now want to transition to thinking about together this unpleasant process and just uncovering it for all its the dirt that's underneath. So part of the reason that it is unappealing to publish is that they're both systemic and then there are individual issues. So on the systemic issues, and I totally claim this because I'm an editor and I sit on a committee of other medical education journal editors. One is the pressure to publish, which how many of you feel? Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a lot of people, Dr. Hunt. We all feel that pressure to publish is driving people to submit. So manuscript submissions across the industry of journals are skyrocketing. And as a result, many editors have what is called a desk rejection. A desk rejection is it doesn't even go to peer review. I've experienced this many, many times from journals, which it just not worth really investing in peer review time if it's going to be rejected anyway. The second thing, and this is a good thing, is around the literature. It's evolving. We have moved out of the realm of pure descriptive studies to looking at some pre-post cohort studies, and we have RCTs. We even have systematic reviews on medical education literature. And so the whole corpus of literature is evolving. This makes it harder to publish a pre-post study, and that's just admittedly the case. We've trained people better. There are better psychometric tools. There's a lot out there that enables people to do better research, especially in education, and that's for sure true in the biomedical paradigm. So those things are making it hard for any given person to publish. The second issue is that our own identities, I know you're living and breathing what I'm living and breathing, which is that clinical footprint, and the work is so overwhelming. It takes me forever to recover from a week being on service, let alone 2 weeks or nights and so forth. Job descriptions, very multi-part. I have a lot of administrative roles now, and none of that has built-in scholarship time. The idea of protected time to do research when you're in education or in clinical innovation is just far and few between. Mentors are super busy. And it's, when we put out calls to look for mentors, we get plenty of mentee invitations, but we don't have enough mentors to go around. Those people that want to mentor are overtaxed, unfortunately, by the need. So those are some system issues. I was talking to somebody about, she had, for some reason, unearthed a college essay, and she couldn't even recognize the person that had written that essay. She couldn't believe how good it was. If I had to kind of graph a trajectory, and those of you with school-age children, if you've looked at homework lately, I'm amazed at what my third grader is learning about essay writing and about compelling language and how to structure that. I peaked essentially, well, 6th grade essay writing was very formative. Sophomore seminars in college, there's a little blip here around spending months and months writing your personal statement, only to realize that it takes residency directors like 10 seconds to read them. And it's all downhill since then, because this is what constitutes my writing, is progress notes and discharge summaries. So this is what you see essentially. This is like telegraphic, it's abbreviations, it's deferring my writing to somebody else's because the way the intern writes the HPI is much better than mine. It's not even full sentences. So this is really the majority of what I'm doing that constitutes writing. So no wonder our skills have dropped so much. What makes this challenging is, as an educator, this is everything that I'm putting out there. And so when I submit it to a journal, I get this instead: rejection. And the word and the concept of rejection is really nowhere else in academic medicine except in the parlance of journals, right? You don't get rejected from your job, you transition from one place to another. You don't. So this language is making it extra hard for us conceptually. The other thing is just written into what it means to be a human being, which is our love of numbers. This is a quote from The Little Prince. Has anybody seen Little Prince? One of my favorite things that I remember from 6th grade is that grown-ups like numbers. They don't ask questions like, do you collect butterflies? Or what does his voice sound like? They want to know how many brothers a person has, how much a kid weighs. Only then, using those numbers, do adults feel like they really know you. And so when I talk to people about promotion, these are the things that are being used to gauge what your worth is, right? Your H-index, the impact factor of the journals that you're publishing. This is by far and away the most common question asked when someone asks about promotion, they flip to the very end of the institutional CV and they say, how many things have you published, right? Yes. And what this has led to is what I call emotional albatrosses. So every manuscript in draft starts with a struggle because the work of publishing or the work of even doing a project is a struggle. And then whenever there's struggle, that leads to avoidance, and then avoidance leads to guilt. And this vicious cycle of terrible negative feelings results in shame. And this is what I'm seeing when people come into my office to talk about promotion and publication comes up, as it always does. What I see in their faces, in these incredibly talented people, their face is shame. How many of you are struggling with the manuscript eternally in draft form? I have a paper that's like 8 years old in terms of the data. And this is the elephant in the room, essentially, is the shame in academic medicine is around publishing. So these represent some of our systems and individual barriers to publishing, which is sad because it makes it hard to realize, why do you want to publish? And yes, part of the reason why I want to publish is to feed my ego, right? I completed a project. Thank goodness I can get some closure on it. A public statement of what I've accomplished and of honor. Yes, promotion. It's impossible to separate publication from promotion. And you know, when you publish, you are joining this membership of self-prominent people who have published. I admit when something gets accepted, I go quickly to my Harvard Catalyst profile is my online profile of publications, and I go there and I stick my impress thing. That's all true. But I think what I've learned over time is that it's also my gift to the community, right? I stay up at night worrying about problems for which I've got a couple of answers to, and I've learned something along the way. And my publications allow me to reach learners and faculty and administrative leaders beyond whom I can reach here in this room. Another thing that publications are for me is it's my voice. And I would say, as a small Asian female, you looking younger than stated age, my voice in person isn't that big, but my voice in a paper is bigger. And again, it's around reaching people that I can't otherwise see. And then they get to see beyond my label. And my hope is that you could see publications as this. So how to get started. I've talked about how bad and how hard it is, and that all represents the barriers. Now I want to just give you the tools to figure out how to do it yourselves. Start with an idea. And what is an idea? This is something I would like to get published, which is a typology of ideas. It is either cause or effect. So what would happen if we did this? It is correlation. How is this related to that? Or it's kind of the switch and bait. We thought it was this, but it was really that. So these are, I'm just saying this tongue in cheek, that there are more, ideas are a little bit deeper than this, but these are the general categories of ideas out there. So let's take an idea and let's do some research. So perform a literature review, articulate a good question. There are 9 different study types. We can design an intervention, and we can conduct a power calculation, beg for subjects, pray for a mentor, someone who will put their needs, your needs over them, realize you forgot to do an IRB, go back and consent people, collect data, lose sleep altogether, analyze the data, or bribe or coerce a statistician, sit down and write, oh, by the way, you don't have any money to do this, you don't have any time to do it either. So that's what you could do with your great idea and implement it in research. On the other hand, you could take an idea and you could, so this is a hierarchy of literature types and study designs. And I find that's what's encouraging about education is that we're not in the realm where we're demanding RCTs. We're kind of still in this realm of, you know, pre-post studies and cohort studies. That's still not unusual in education. And the second thing is that there's still value in editorials and letters, perhaps in medical education more so than a lot of different realms in biomedicine. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that an opportunity to publish what you're teaching is MedEdPORTAL, the journal that is part of the AAMC. And what we really value is usability. So a little bit about MedEdPORTAL, Medline indexed, open access, free, no publication fee. And that's, I think, what we're most proud of. And the idea is anything that you're teaching or using to assess can be published in MedEdPORTAL. And that's peer reviewed right along with the manuscript. The idea is that it's usable, so you'd have to package it in a way that other people could use at other institutions. But to move on, you could take that idea and you could share it. I already mentioned how perspectives and editorials have a lot of power still in academic medicine. Academics medicine, not the journal, but in general. And so I just took a sampling of some of the perspective pieces that were published in the New England Journal recently. And one is it's surfacing really important topics that we need to think about, like sexual harassment in academic medicine. But a subtext to that is these are not things that are too far off the realm of what you could write about, right? Time's up for medicine, only time will tell. Unfortunately, some things got cut off there, but like an angry patient. These are not rocket science. These are opinions stated by people just like you, captured in a compelling way and published, that happened to be published in the New England Journal. If I had to give a very simplistic formula for what it takes to write a perspectives piece, catchy title. So how many of you were at that workshop? Title is everything. Yeah, nod, nod. Compelling tone, and it helps to have a framework. So let me give you an example of how I took lemons in my educational research and turned them into lemonade. So flipped classroom, done very well and a lot in undergraduate medical education. We tried to do this in the internal medicine residency. I had 3 really motivated residents who created Khan Academy type videos for teaching LVAD, so left ventricular assist devices. Spent hours to do that. They were popular too. Some of them were going to be chief residents, and they convinced all their residents to do the videos before they attended the lecture on LVADs. How many of their peers, their friends, did you think looked at the videos? 0. This is out of a class. Oh, I know, Hila, it was really sad. Yeah, it's probably in your cohort too. Hila was a resident of ours, so we don't blame her personally. We got 0, like spend all these hours putting together these materials and to work through the study design, apply for IRB, create, validity evidence around the assessment tools, and nobody actually did the flipped classroom component of it. So what we did is wrote a perspectives piece for the Journal of Graduate Medical Education to say why the flipped classroom might not work in residency education. And our compelling tone was there. We had a catchy title. And then our helpful framework was essentially why students might thrive in a flipped classroom environment and why residents who are working super hard, get all their learning on the job, might not benefit from flipped classroom. So that's an example of taking, a terrible outcome and at least putting my voice and our perspective out there in a way that's still cited. You can take your idea and you can improve on it. So really, really reductionistic and simplistic, but I think that the biomedical paradigm for publishing focuses a lot on hypothesis testing and really accumulating proof that something's going to work. This is incredibly important if you're going to make patient care decisions about this. I think there's still more liberation around innovation in medical education and QI as well. And so the burden of proof is less because in theory, we're not going to harm the learners as much. And so there's value in novel ideas, and experimenting with that and figuring out how to scale it. So this overly simplistic model works in the sense that we can publish a lot of innovation reports. Every medical education journal has something that is a manuscript type called innovation report, and they all have different titles for that manuscript, but what it's essentially doing is surfacing innovation. I'm just giving you an example, some snapshots of journals that do. This is the Journal of Graduate Medical Education and Parents as Teachers. So that's kind of a play on residents as teachers. Here's another from the journal Teaching and Learning in Medicine around residents' reflections on non-medical home visits. I hope, and this is from academic medicine, I hope you're thinking about your own work and the committees and the activities you're working on, thinking, I'm not that far off. I have a great idea, and I could report it as an innovation report. And the great thing about this manuscript type is novelty is what is prioritized over evaluation. They're not looking for clinical outcomes to have changed of these. The focus is on how new is this as an idea. I didn't list this here, but one of my favorite innovation reports published in academic medicine, and those of you who are administrative leaders might be amused to hear about this, is actually about the use of simulation to, and they had applicants for the department chair go through a simulation. The simulation was of a frustrated faculty member who wanted to get promoted despite not having published. They put 29 applicants to the department chair position through the simulation, and there's like no evaluation data, but the process itself was so novel, and their lessons learned from it were articulated very well in this. And so that's an extreme example of an innovation without any evaluation data that was put out into the literature. You can take an idea and you can draw it. I already learned from the last career development session that not all of us feel strong about artistic skills, but this was drawn. Hila, do you know who did this? Yes, absolutely. I interviewed her for, I interviewed Amrita as an applicant to our residency program. This is published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and they have a graphic medicine section. This is work by Grace Ferris, who's a hospitalist that many of you may know, who used to be at the BIDMC and is now at St. Luke's. And she is she has carved an entire career around social media and her artistic skills. This is coming from her role as a comic strip writer for the Dartmouth newsletter. This is in Annals, and it's about female physicians coming back from maternity leave, back to work, and I love this part, box for your heart. So what I love about where we've come so far in scholarship, that we're only broadening the different types of manuscripts and publications. I mean, this comes with a citation in Medline. So there are different avenues for you to express and demonstrate your ideas. It's no longer the original research manuscript. You can still take that idea and design it. So this is academic medicine's last page. My formula for it, practical tips and some catchy infographic. Here's an example. Congratulations, your article has been accepted. Now what? Media, social media, and other outlets for promoting your work. For some of you, you may be living and breathing that kind of practical tip, and you could publish it in academic medicine as this. I was working with a mentee who has a really neat way to think about slide 2. So every slide 2 for a clinical talk is around the epidemiology of delirium, or that kind of very dry numeric data that most people sort of glaze over. And he has just a neat way to present this in his talks on oncology topics. He put it up as an infographic with some guidelines, and then we just got this accepted in academic medicine. So be on the lookout for that. And then finally, you can take an idea and you can narrate it. So you are living and breathing amazing patient stories all the time. Find a way to take those clinical experiences and share it. I'm running a writing group right now with, about patient narratives. And you wouldn't believe the stories that come out, because your day-to-day interactions with patients have so much to contribute to the rest of us as physicians. This is purposely in small font, only to make the point that virtually every journal that has some clinical footprint publishes patient narratives. And so when I think about, one more thing. Take an idea and get somebody else to do it. That's just a tongue-in-cheek way to say mentor somebody in it. In academic medicine, there are specific calls every summer. I think we just closed the call, looking for letters to the editor from trainees, and only trainees can be on the byline. This year's theme was on firsts, and we just were oversubscribed with a number of trainees that wanted to submit their letters to the editor. There's also JAMA Internal Medicine's Teachable Moments. First author must be a trainee. So think about examples of waste that you're encountering day in and day out. And think about working with a trainee who often have more energy and enthusiasm than we do to publish in JAMA Internal Medicine as a teachable moment. So I think about the opportunities being rife. And so when you look at the access of word count from 400 to 3,000, we're beyond the original research 3,000 word manuscript. There's stuff all across the spectrum where you can publish. And when I think about word count, 3,000 words is a lot. I think it's like 15 double-spaced words, but I could probably put together a thick 600-word brief research report for an educational journal. New Ideas, Journal of General, can't even say it, JGME, has a call right now for new ideas. They are looking for 650-word abstracts, essentially, of new ideas in graduate medical education. Again, those of you working in residency or education program leadership probably have great things that you could potentially submit. And it's just easier to generate 600 words than it is 3,000. And then patient narratives really run the gamut here. I mentioned 12 Tips here, which is a journal from Medical Teacher, but the warning is that they're not actually accepting 12 Tips anymore. But 12 Tips has been a very practical manuscript type for teaching things like, how do I teach informed consent? How do I teach the millennial learners? Things that you're living and breathing and are part of your daily life, you could encapsulate into a practical tips type of manuscript. Just a word, and I think this is one slide that I showed during my workshop, around the different journals that you can publish in. So these are the core medical education journals, and there are many, many more than this. There's clinical journals that also publish medical education. Don't forget that medical education and QI are essentially two sides of the same coin. So think about these quality journals. There are good educational research journals, and there's also simulation. So it really, and this is far from an exhaustive list of journals where you can publish medical education type work. If any of you are specialists, then you can often take your educational innovations and try them out on your specialty journals. You know, for instance, dermatology may not have as many educators, and so the work that you would not normally be able to publish in medical education, you could potentially take to your specialty journal. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the quiz mode. What was the one thing that Atul Gawande recommended in the epilogue of his book, Better, A Surgeon's Note on Performance? Did anyone read this book? No? Okay. Yeah, great book, great book. All right, what do we think? Are you guys listening? What is my talk on? It's about writing, so. But here's the more elaborated quote on it. An audience is a community. The published word is a declaration of membership. I already talked about membership. Choose your audience and write something. So he talks at the end of the book about 10 things that you should do, and writing is one of them. All right. So we have talked about why it's hard. We are talking about different avenues for publishing that really go beyond the original research manuscript. And now I want to think about writing in particular. I think we're all big believers in the growth mindset, except as it relates to writing. Because I hear a lot people say, I'm a terrible writer. I can't write. I don't have time. It's all very negative. And so here is to encourage you to think about training and mentoring in writing specifically. We could all benefit from training and mentoring to be better clinicians, to be better educators. But there are opportunities to ask somebody to be a mentor specifically for writing. You may have senior mentors on your projects. Ask them to give you feedback on their writing. There's probably a reason why they are your senior mentor, and they may have a lot of facility with writing. So ask about mentoring your writing. There are writing groups I mentioned. I don't know how available they are in this institution. I run them on specific manuscript types like patient narratives or perspectives pieces or innovation reports. And so if that's an opportunity, either through an organization or locally, or you could start one, that would be a great opportunity. There are writing courses. There are plenty of writing courses. There's CME courses. There's a master class that's offered through Toronto. And then there's self-study. I have to admit that a lot of what I've learned about writing is reading online. Let me advocate for a series in the journal Perspectives in Medical Education by Lorelei Lingard. It's called The Writer's Craft. And she essentially writes a series of articles about how to write the intro, how to write the discussion, what the methods are supposed to talk about. Those 4 articles will take you very far in the structure of the original manuscript. I would say also one of the activities that has probably helped me the most as a writer is essentially peer review. So it's so much easier to critique somebody else's work than it is my own. And so watching somebody's unpolished work come in as a manuscript and helping them reframe it so that it becomes publishable helps me realize, oh, okay, that's how that person should have spun that to make it more compelling. Or this is what disorganized methods look like. Much easier to do that with somebody else's work than your own. There's also the idea of building a writing team. And so to me, the elements of a writing team involve a mentor. Again, there's a hidden curriculum here around the importance of mentorship. The second thing is, you know, you need people that get it done. I called them a worker bee, but people who will push you and be that form of accountability in taking the next step. You need a nitpicker. This is the person who loves to copy edit and correct your grammar and punctuation and so forth. I absolutely am one of those people. And then sometimes your mentor serves this role, but it can also be helpful to have a visionary, someone who can write that 5th paragraph of the discussion section and talk about the implications, someone who has a broad-based view of the topic that you're publishing in. So hopefully your mentor, but not always. Maybe your mentor is really the person who's been guiding the project, and this visionary could help you sort of get out of your head in terms of how you might pitch the work. Another important part of writing is becoming a student of writing. So writing is an art, you know, obviously many people have their professions all based on it. We don't. We never got trained to be writers or to think about ourselves as writers. And so there are many ways to become a student of the art of writing. And one is the more you write, the more you write. It will get easier each time, just as it is with any other skill. The more you practice, the more you drill, the better you will get. And a corollary to that is the more you read, the more you write. I do not mean reading more charts or reading more patient notes, but I mean collecting quotes. This is the kind of stuff I had the liberty to do when I was an English major, was to collect quotes in the journal and to read with intention. Reading with intention, whether it's scholarly papers or books, is to say, I love that word, I love that phrase, and why was it that I was drawn to the way that was phrased? And you will learn by kind of having a meta reflection on the reading process about how to use words to your benefit. One thing about reading and writing is, for me, it's got a cadence. So sometimes what I tell my mentees is, this phrase just sings because there's something about the pace or the tone or the word choice that makes it so especially persuasive. And then lastly, fall in love. The English language, I believe, it's really the only language I know, but the English language is, it's wonderful and it's beautiful. Sometimes reading's not for you. I find that NPR is a place that I can collect a lot of great words, and I actually, like a nerd, I put those great words into, you know, a note app on my phone. So immerse yourself in language. Realize that you're already surrounded by great examples of writing, whether it's in emails or newspapers or on the radio. And this is my final point. It's really the activation barrier. This is probably the only concept from chemistry that I'm still retaining. And we have this, right? You have reactants. You have the skill set. You have the motivation. You have the goals. And products are your scholarly products. And what we have here is a huge activation barrier. To me, acknowledging that and figuring out concrete strategies to get over the activation barrier is step number 1, 2, and 3. I hope this talk has been around the idea of crossing the threshold. And these are the voices that are in your head that are stopping you. These are the parts that are feeding into that activation barrier. I can't do this. I don't have time. Nobody's watching me do this. It's scary to get rejected. All of those things are fed into it. So stop giving yourself excuses. That's a hard ask, but that is part of what's feeding into it. So make it easy to take that transition from thought into word. I talked in our career development session about the importance of taking unformed, sort of vague thoughts and putting them into intention through writing. There's a neurocognitive process that's really important in that construction. So an ideas notebook, it might be a physical one. I mentioned that I have a notes app, and essentially any crazy idea that I get in the shower goes into my notes app. It's very different from pulling out logging onto my computer, pulling up Microsoft Word, trying to figure out where to save this document that has random stuff on it. Instead, I just use a notes app. It might be the Apple Notes app. The app I use is called Simple Note, and everything's in it, like many, many drafts of manuscripts that will never see the light of day. But have a place where it's a natural reflex to take your ideas and put them in the form of words somewhere. Writing with reckless abandon is a nice way of saying vomit on the page and clean it up later. This is a writing practice that I use all the time, which is, whether it's writing a letter of recommendation for a student or generating ideas for the intro, is just to write. Write conversationally. Don't use synonyms. Don't hit the delete key. Just write and then clean it up later. No one will see the first 5 or 10 drafts of what you write. And this allows you to liberate, again, to kind of get over that activation barrier. It's related to the inner critic. I think what I learned when I was an English major is like I had to choose the right word and I could never go back and edit it. That's definitely not the case anymore. The concept of harnessing energy rather than time is a much bigger talk. It comes from the business literature, which is, we all know we have very, very finite time. But your energy around an idea is something that can feed the motivation to write. Let me give you an example. So I am working with some great hospitalists on, this is like make it count twice. We gave a workshop at SHM, and this fed into the idea of writing a perspectives piece. We have great conversations on the phone. We make them 45 minutes long. And the 15 minutes for the rest of the hour is used separately for us to draft outlines for that manuscript. I've just spent the time sort of engaging and thinking and getting excited about the topic. Why put that away and put it on a task list to have to come back to it 3 weeks later when I have no idea what we even talked about? So harness the energy that comes from meetings or collaborative work to put something on paper. And then lastly, very mundane, use dictation software. Last question. So what did Paul Kalanithi choose to do when he faced a terminal cancer diagnosis? How many of you read When Breath Becomes Air? It's an unforgettable book. And this quote is something that reminds me of the value and importance of writing. I never met him. He sounded like he was an amazing neurosurgeon. But what I learned from him was his words. Be ready, be seated, see what courage sounds like. Above all, see what it is to live, to profoundly influence the lives of others by your words. And that was his gift to us that has continued to live on even past his own life. So I hope I have given you a sense of that all the skills that you are bringing to this job and to your life and things that you are naturally gifted with and the things that you could do can find some form of expression in scholarship, no matter what it is that you do. And I'm going to end with a QR code. So hold up your phone, I just learned how to do this, and your camera, and point it at that, and magically a URL survey will pop up. And the survey is essentially asking you to write down one thing that you will commit to doing differently as a result of this talk. And if you want to get a reminder about it, put your email address, and I vow to email you with your commitment in 3 months. So, did it work for anybody? Yes, good. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about what you're going to put on there. Try to be specific and, possibly measurable. And make sure you get that email address in correctly. Great, I'll let you continue to do that. It has been a great pleasure sharing you what is one of my passions. I feel tremendous guilt because I now have to go back and actually work on publishing and writing myself. So thank you very much.
Questions, comments?
Grace, thank you very much. That was great. Really appreciate your perspectives and reading from my background in writing. The rejection piece is often really,
So thank you, Grace, for coming. The rejection is often of whether it be a grant or a publication, a significant barrier, especially to young individuals. So could you comment a bit more about that? And can you also comment a little bit more on the predatory journals and how to deal with predatory journals that are proliferating? So those are two questions. Finally, I did read a bit of your poem. It was great.
Had him in the front row.
It looked like homeless. A poem about a homeless person. Maybe I didn't read it completely, but it looked really good. So you should continue to perfect your poetry.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to hit your second point about predatory journals. So this predatory journals are, you get these emails about, Dear Honorable Dr. G.C. Huang, which is clearly like pulled from Medline, that have arisen entrepreneurially out of the pressure to publish. It is really hard. Like I get these a lot. And because the journal names are so close to something that sounds authentic, I think there's a journal for academic medicines. And if you didn't know, you just, and in the early days, I definitely signed up to be on their editorial board when I was a young faculty member. And it is really challenging. It's a little bit like whack-a-mole. So efforts that people have done to try to stamp this out on a systematic level have not really worked. I mean, I think capitalism has sort of allowed those to rise. And I think the concern that I have is not only that people are being taken advantage of and that they're generating a lot of money, but it's almost beyond the bandwidth of promotion committees to go through citations and look for the legitimate ones. And so there are probably scholars out there that are profiting from this. It is really, really challenging. Over time, I've gotten a sense of the hallmarks of it. The word honorable usually is a good sense, or my last name before my first name. But I think for novice or new faculty, it is especially challenging. I think one sign would be, if you have to pay up front, then there's probably something there that suggests that it's not working. But this is also has been a disservice to other journals as well. So the first point about rejection is also hard. The scope of my journal, I work longer and harder on my rejection letters, especially when they're trainees, than I do on my acceptance letters or revise with resubmit. There is a great and encouraging movement that trainees in particular are getting the attention of their journals because we see that their voices have tremendous value and perspective where, I may have lost that. And so I know academic medicine, MedEdPORTAL is doing this. A lot of journals in medical education are really trying to lift up the trainee voice in that sense. So specific author development initiatives to help them write and to help them learn the skills of writing earlier. It will always be a community of the elite, and I also suffer from this, trying to get published as an educator. My promotions committee insists that I publish in the New England Journal or JAMA, a research paper, in order to be considered for promotion. And so there remains a disconnect between the type of journal and who I am as an educator, and the rejection rate certainly is not helping that. I would say as a positive spin that the journals are looking to open access. So MedEdPORTAL is an open access journal as a new avenue of growth. So JAMA Network Open is a relatively new journal of the JAMA series that has a higher acceptance rate. This is true of PLOS One and BMJ Innovations as well. And so granted that there's a publication fee associated with them, they do have the marker of very well-known prestigious journals and are finding a way to still publish in an online-only format some of the great work that's happening. So I'm hoping that will balance a little bit of the extremely low acceptance rates we're seeing from the high-impact journals. Other questions, Lucy? Oh, sorry.
Hi. One of the things you mentioned was, actually you've mentioned it twice now, was about being an editor on a journal or an online journal. And do you think there's value in that even as a young faculty who hasn't published much? Because I do think I have an internal, statement that like, why are you editing other people if you're still working out on your own? But does it allow for growth as well as a early faculty member?
Definitely the subject of a whole different talk, but I built my career on loving words and the editing process. And so one potential trajectory that could go in parallel with your trajectory as an educator and leader and so forth is getting involved as an avid reader of the literature, a peer reviewer, an associate editor, editorial board, editor-in-chief. And not everybody wants to be an editor-in-chief. For sure, our committee is full of very persnickety people for some reason. But that is an avenue of growth that I think is really important. And it gives you a window into the editorial process that you won't gain just simply by being a reader of the work. So set aside those negative voices like I'm not qualified enough. And there are also roles like I worked with Dan Dressler with being an associate editor for Journal Watch, and that tremendously grew my skills for writing and looking at the literature in a systematic way. So I think what's great is hospital medicine has lots of opportunities to write those summaries of the clinical literature that can help your writing skills. You'll get some feedback on it, and then it allows you to practice the work of writing. So yes, if there are editorial fellowships or associate editor positions, put your name out there, try. Yeah. Other questions? Hugh, yeah. Oh.
So a trap I often see people fall into is, if I just do a little more, I'll make it better. And they keep working and they keep working and they don't quite know when it's time to actually put their neck out there and submit papers. What advice might you have for people who are in that endless cycle of one more fix and it'll be better? The other, in response to the previous comment, many journals now have programs where assistant professors in particular can be sort of trained to be associate editors. They come on board as an apprentice to an EIC or an AE, and so they're not judging papers solo, but they're doing it under the mentorship of an AE for a journal.
That sounds like a great program. I know less about the second part that you had mentioned. A parallel situation would be being mentored on a peer review. So you may not necessarily get peer review requests as a junior faculty member, but for sure your senior faculty are, and they may not have time to do it. So ask if you can be mentored doing a peer review, and you'll get a lot out of that process. I do a lot of mentored peer reviews, and they learn about the editorial process. The first question, I think there are two tendencies. The one is the enemy being the perfect being the enemy of the good. And sometimes it will take a reality check from that senior mentor to say, enough is enough, it's time to move on. That's why I enforce the importance of a writing team, because if you do this alone, and I have papers where I'm the main driver, they will never get done. But I think it's the activation barrier. I think calling out the fact that there's fear behind the decision to actually hit the button for submit is something that if we acknowledge, it may help them get over perfectionistic tendencies for that. But it's a really good point. And I would say when you're investing time in submitting, I feel like the last 5% is what takes 50% of the time, or responding to reviewers' comments also takes a tremendous amount of time, sometimes longer than it took to write your whole paper. So there's a lot of time that needs to be invested in the submission process, no question about that. And I know you didn't comment on this, but again, around the idea of harnessing energy rather than time is when I get those revision requests, I try to act on them immediately or soon, because 3 months down the road, it will be extremely painful. I've found that as a busy educator, I'm often trying to manage the activation barrier to doing work, not just publishing. So, but thank you for your points.
Just a couple of comments. One, the only thing worse than the shame of getting a rejection when you're a junior faculty member is the shame of the rejection when you are a senior faculty member. When you get the desk rejection from the editor of academic medicine 2 days after you sat next to him at a meeting in Washington, D.C., and you take that a little personally. Not that I have experience. The second thing, a corollary to what you were saying about feeling more accessible to submit things. One of the biggest problems that people have is they don't read the directions. And I'm not saying this just because I spent 17 years teaching high school, but people don't read the directions. They submit the wrong article format to an inappropriate journal. They do, and they have great ideas, but they get desk rejections because it's not the right place. And so if people did a little bit more upfront work and send it to the right place, it would get accepted, and you don't have to go through that crushing receipt of the "thank you for your submission, we read it with great interest."
Yes, that's a really good point. I would say the editorial process absolutely rewards those S's on the Myers-Briggs, the ISTJ types, because details are incredibly important, whether it's punctuation. Luckily, a lot of journals are going to submit it my way or submit it any way you want. So a little bit more flexibility around formatting of punctuation and font and so forth. But you're right, you still absolutely need to go back to the instructions. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
You talked a lot about the promotions process,
Yeah.
and I was curious if you'd comment. I think that many people in medical education find that the more traditional promotions criteria often aren't recognizing sort of new forms of scholarship. Tutorials comes to mind, other kinds of workshops and so on. I was curious if you comment on that, and are there major academic institutions where there are sort of best practices around recognizing some of these alternative forms of medical education scholarship?
It's a great question. I don't know of the institutions that are. I have a feeling that we will move towards valuing dissemination in complementarity with scholarship. I don't think we'll ever leave the published paper as the coin of the realm. But the concept of impact factor has been levied critique in many directions, and so altmetrics has been something available that can show the spread of your ideas and the work, perhaps in a more meaningful way. I would love to see an era, and maybe it's 5 or 10 years down the line, where the number of followers and your social media presence would be able to be measured in some way that demonstrates your impact as well. We have flexible forms of the HMS institutional CV that allows us to talk about that, but no, there isn't a place that says, how many followers you have. And I'm hoping that will be an evolution for sure. And I will also acknowledge, if you are a researcher, editorials will not matter, at least for HMS CV. So to me, the first step is to learn to write and to start getting familiar with the publication process, and then work towards the different kinds of publications that may have more value if promotion is an important goal for you. But really great point there.